Hello and welcome to another episode of the RedIron Retail Roundtable. I'm Jim Roddy, your host for today. Thank you so much for joining us. The title of this episode is Omnichannel 2.0 Dilemma, Built In versus Bolted On. And here to help us navigate that topic are our two favorite retail technology experts. Back with us again are first Jeff Patterson, a 20-year veteran of RedIron Technologies, where he serves as the CTO. Jeff, great to see you again.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be back.
And you just got back recently between episodes. The last episode, you're going to be leaving for a vacation in Hawaii, celebrating your 30-year anniversary. How was Hawaii?
Hawaii was great. Getting back was a little bit complicated with COVID. It was touch and go as to whether we were going to make it back into Canada, which wouldn't have been the worst thing. I mean, if you're stuck somewhere, getting there was the main issue. Getting back is like, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But no, everything eventually worked out. Just a long sleepless period where we were dealing with the COVID bureaucracy. But other than that, it was good.
Very nice. Well, it's good to have you back. And again, congratulations on 30 years. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. So also back with us is Barry Egerter, RedIron's Chief Operating Officer. He's been part of the RedIron team for nearly 6 years and has worked in the retail technology industry for many years beyond that. Barry, hello again. Good to see you.
Hey, Jim. Likewise. Good to be back.
And so again, Barry, you're in London, Ontario. You spent the last several weeks there. I'm across the lake here in Erie. How did you like the rain and the cold that we experienced while Jeff was in the fun and sun?
Yeah, I mean, we've had pretty good weather, I'd say. I mean, Jeff's probably jealous. We didn't have as many lava flows here, so much more enjoyable, I'd say. Good time to be around, out and about. So, yep, very good.
And you and I haven't had to worry about like a coconut falling on our head, right?
We've lived with no imminent danger whatsoever. Yeah.
Very good. Well, that's why a lot of people I'm noticing are coming from Hawaii and vacationing in the October-November timeframe.
Very popular.
Right around Lake Erie. Perfect time to do that. Never going to get sunburned doing that. No sun poisoning. Well, to our viewers, if you're not familiar with RedIron, they're a multi-vendor systems integrator that helps retailers implement, extend, or maintain any major retail software system. RedIron is forging retail innovation and solving retailer pain points through technology. For more information on the company, visit redirontech.com. Okay, again, our topic is Omnichannel 2.0 Dilemma, built in versus bolted on. So let's start at the ground floor. And Jeff, can you define for audience what's the difference between just regular, normal Omnichannel and Omnichannel 2.0?
So I'll admit that. We live and breathe Omnichannel in RedIron, but I'll admit I wasn't familiar with a specific categorization of Omnichannel 2. So I actually had to look it up because I mean, and to me, it's all about getting closer and closer to a vision whereby your customers can reach you through any of your distribution mechanisms, and you can, you're never turning a customer away. So, I mean, historically, Omnichannel, way back when was sort of, I'm going to know my customer a little better so that their presence online and their presence in store can be married to a degree, and so I have some familiarity with customers as they come in and what their buying patterns are. And I think, I wouldn't call it 2.0. I would just call it, how can we best meet our customers wherever they encounter us and make that seamless across all my touch points. And so, I mean, 2.0 is just sort of saying, we want to move the, if Omnichannel 1 was superficial, 2.0 is more, radical, changing your processes from the ground up. But there's not a stark difference. Like no one says, okay, now I'm going to 2.0. It's always gradations in terms of how you're implementing your customer engagement across all your selling channels. So, I mean, I don't in my mind make a distinction, but I mean, it's fair. Like I understand what the term conveys. It really is sort of, can I reorient my business around the customer and, make sure that everything I'm doing is aimed at making sure that no customer interaction point is suboptimal, right? Making sure that everything works across seamlessly without friction and that my customers are able to get whatever I have to sell through whatever means that they can contact me, right?
Yeah, and it seems like, to draw a parallel, we were just talking about you traveling, but imagine if you left London and instead of spending only 2 weeks in Hawaii, you came back 2 years later, right? It would seem like, wow,
Now
look at
you're
all the
talking.
things that have changed. But for Barry, who had been there the whole time, would be like, well, it doesn't seem radically different to me because it's just kind of marching on, and you guys have been so close to it.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't seem like there's some
Right.
switch that's been flipped. So Barry, what
Yeah,
would you add
exactly.
to that in terms of any delineation between on the channel and 2.0?
Well, I like the description Jeff said. Is where did 2.0 really start, right? Like, what's the timeline? What's the crossover between omnichannel and omnichannel 2? So it's a good term. It really just means an evolution, right? I mean, anytime you put a 2.0 on something, someone's likely to take that rather than a 1.0 first release if it goes anywhere, right? But omnichannel, I would say, is more multi-channel. Historically, it's when e-com became a thing, and there were more than one way to get product instead of just showing up at the store all the time. And it was, like we've talked many times before, disparate systems. So you've got a way to get access to products and have deliveries and all that through an e-com system. You got a brick and mortar presence that kind of knows you through the standard loyalty systems and that sort of thing. And omnichannel was an attempt to tie all that together and get a view of you as a customer and follow you around, right? So omnichannel 2.0 is really just, to me, it's just where we are today based on all the tech improvements and everything that comes along with it. Because as all that stuff evolves, your opportunity evolves as to how this stuff works. So tying it all together, and the topic today about bolt on versus built in, there's so many ways to achieve it, and the key is still understanding the customer and being able to tailor the experience to that particular customer wherever they go.
Great. And so before my next question, we've kind of been joking about the weather here. I don't think anybody can hear it, but it just started hailing here, and
Ah,
everything
very
is
nice.
pounding off the roof and the windows. So I'm definitely not in Hawaii. This is God's way of
Beautiful.
sending mini coconuts our way, right? And falling, those things are falling down on my head. So okay, so we said we were going to start on the ground floor. Let's move up to, I guess we can say, floor 2.0. And Barry, if you can talk about, through the lens of on the channel 2.0, what's the difference between built-in and bolted on? How would you explain that to our audience?
I'd say very much like what I was leading into earlier is that built in is just it comes prepackaged. It means you've got a suite or a platform that knows how to integrate all this for you, whereas bolted on is standard integration, right? So it's taking a CRM, order management system, an inventory system, purchasing, supply chain. It's taking all those different pieces and marrying them together, and then trying to manage those flows. So built in any software or tech platform, built in is going to give you a lot of prepackaged capabilities that are challenging to put together through a bolted on process. But on the flip side, bolt on lets you customize, and built in does it a certain way, right? So there's always pros and cons. If you're out shopping for a new platform, having a built-in option is probably the best way to go, because you can start with something that actually understands the entire ecosystem and gets you there a little quicker. But then, depending on how that platform is open to extensibility and customization, you may be stuck with following business patterns that are pre-baked into that, versus a bolted-on approach where you can change it and tailor it to your needs.
Great. And Jeff, why don't you take it a step further, where we're talking about, bolted on versus built in. And so part of Omnichannel is not just giving people the product they want, when they want it, where they want it, but it's also recognizing them as an individual. So can you talk about, why is personalization so difficult from a bolted on standpoint?
Yeah, well, I mean, in all cases, there are boundaries to your systems, right? And so what we're really talking about is, does the customer live inside the boundaries, or does the customer sort of live outside the boundaries? So I've got a selling system on a given channel. Is my customer information integrated into that, or is it, do I sort of, some other system is the system of truth, and I'm just sort of, I'm interacting with that at arm's length? And then when that's the case, the system probably doesn't have that as the central organizing principle, right? So that's really the, that's the challenge of recognizing the customer in that, the systems recognize the customer probably in different ways. And so getting a uniform recognition of the customer, it might be that, I recognize you on my e-commerce presence, but I don't have all the data about you that I would have in store, or vice versa. And so that can be a choppy conversation. It's like, I want to, I was looking up something 2 weeks ago, I forget what it was, I just want to see if you guys have it, and say, here, instead of saying, here it is, bring it up on your phone and let me look at it, you could, if you had a fully integrated system, say, oh yeah, you're the same person, I can reach, I can see what your search history is, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, the the ability to integrate customer information really depends on it being the organizing principle of the system. And if that isn't the goal of your vendor from a omni-channel perspective, if the vendor is there just to be a transaction engine or what have you, and customer hangs off to the side, that makes it more challenging. So it really comes down to, as much as anything, not so much the tech, but the sort of structural structural organization and goal of the system.
Got it. Great. And I guess the analogy that's going through my head right now is, so again, you guys in Canada, you guys have a different healthcare system, but here in the United States, every healthcare system seems to be incredibly disparate and semi, bolted on. And so every time you go to a, new, physician or outlet or something like that, it's like, fill out these 5 pages of paperwork and tell us all about your history. And you think like, man, why can't you just
Right.
I've shared this, 55 times in the past few years. Like, how come they don't know this? And you can imagine that's, again, in the United States, what are you going to do? You have one healthcare system, but in a retail standpoint, people have choices, right? And so people are not going to tolerate that, for as long as we've had to. So Barry, can you tie this all together for us? And so we're talking about bringing the enterprise together through technology, not just, ginning up, enabling legacy systems to be a little bit higher functioning. So I guess, would you say that built-in is the way to go? Like, you've got to do built-in if you want to reach the highest level of proficiency and reach that true Omnichannel 2.0.
I think I'll fall back to my previous statement saying built-in is a jump start, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get further along with a built-in versus a bolt-on. The time frame would certainly be different, and the challenges would be different. People don't tend to have a complete system that does all this from one end to the other, right? So that's rare, and that's something that even once you find it and you get it in place, you're still going to, as a business, see things that you would like to change, right? So being able to affect the change is important. Now, on the flip side, like I say, doing it all from the ground up as a bolt-on, you can do more with that over time, but it's so much legwork, especially with the omni-channel approach, tying it all together and coming up with a flow that makes sure that the customer is still the center of everything for this. That's hard to do. And like Jeff said, the source of truth. One of the first questions in omni-channel is always, what's your source of truth for customer, for inventory, for orders, for pricing, for taxes, and then all of that information has to be replicated and represented wherever that customer goes to be able to make all this effective. And in omnichannel, the one piece that's really unique that we don't see in others is AI and machine learning. Being able to really, propose upselling opportunities or clienteling or that sort of thing for a customer, knowing about the customer and knowing what their interests are and being able to do that in a digital world, it's a lot easier on an e-com environment because you sign in, you identify yourself, you have all your order history, you've got built-in tracking mechanisms in browsers these days and cookies and that sort of thing. As soon as you go to a brick and mortar location, you walk into a store as a customer, no one knows you until you interact with someone. And then, at a brick and mortar, if you go up to a salesperson and start talking to them, if they have tech that enables that salesperson to bring you up as a customer and identify your order history, your wish list, the products that you're most likely to buy based on previous history, that's something that really engages you. Otherwise, when you walk into a store, the signage, the branding, all the things that are there are generic. It's tailored to the average customer that's going to come in, or the items or the products that are really being pushed for that particular point in time. So the stores traditionally have had to, rearrange things and make sure that they have a good strategy as to the positioning, location of the products. It always used to be in grocery, there was an end of aisle that was like a big thing because everybody has to turn around the aisle to go from one to the next. Tech in this new world in omnichannel, if you have a really solid system, whether it's built in or bolted on, that sales associate should be able to work with you as a customer and identify, what's the biggest items that are in your interest, and make sure that they're both stocked and available, and something that they can either, pitch to you on the spot or get you to sign up for an order and get it down the road. So I think the built-in gets you there quicker if you're starting fresh, but there's no reason you can't do a bolted-on approach and just take it a piece at a time. But the customer has to be centric to everything.
Yeah, it sounds like at some point you're going to have to bolt on, right? But if you start with a very small system and you have to bolt on, just throwing a number out there, 20 things, it's way different from bolting on 2 or 3 things at the very end.
Right. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, well, good. That was very helpful. So let's talk about some actions that our audience and our listeners can take. But let's talk about first maybe what they shouldn't do. So Jeff, can you talk about maybe some of the most common or most painful mistakes that you've seen retailers make related to this whole bolt-on versus built-in?
Right. Well, the topic is opposite. We're partnering with I would say premier built-in solution provider, and there are, the balance you're going to have to strike is that if you're going built-in, then all your systems are implicated. And so if people have a lot of investment and they've built a really nice sort of supplier order management system, and now they're saying, no, I want to, adopt the, customer centric, everything is sort of focused on that. It means that you're disadvantaging yourself in terms of your investment in those systems historically and the capabilities that they had and how they interact with your suppliers. So, I mean, the challenge that the built-in partner that we have is that exactly, is that people, everyone's down with the concept, and you imagine that eventually you'll make it all the way around the wheel and everyone will have, let me come back to that. But at some point, built-in will be ubiquitous. It's just, what is the boundary, and people sort of setting those boundaries correctly. So I would say that right now, if I was making decisions from a retailer's perspective in terms of charting my course, I would want to be making sure that I wasn't making any decisions that precluded me from eventually, putting a system whereby the customer was front and center. And that's tough to say categorically, right? Like, so it's decision by decision. What am I doing? Am I doing something that is going to put me offside in terms of being able to eventually migrate to a system that is sort of customer centric or what have you? But so I would say the mistakes that people might be making now is just not, they're trying to fight today's fights and they're looking at the problems that they have. And I think that sometimes they're not cognizant of the fact that, eventually we're going to have to get to something where the customer is centric. And that's not just, I'm going to buy this package and then my customer is going to be centric. It really is a reorientation of your way of interacting across all your business systems. And so just, have that in mind. Don't focus strictly on today's issue. Try and look, what's this landscape going to look like in 5 years? Now, having said all that, I do think there is a model, and Barry sort of touched on it, in terms of, what is the proper level of customer engagement? So if I'm in fashion, absolutely, I want to have a rich interaction with my customers. But if you're trying to bolt a rich customer interaction onto a purchasing scenario that doesn't fit, it's like back in the day when Radio Shack used to ask me my phone number every time. It's like, I'm just buying batteries, man. You don't need this, right? Like, so I think there is still a role for, anonymous in person and sort of just a very transactional. The dollar store is never going to engage with you about what your hopes and dreams are for, the soap aisle or what have you. So I think that, so I think first know your business, and but in terms of mistakes, make sure you're not putting yourself offside in terms of being able to eventually, migrate to something that's more customer centric.
Yeah, and my guess is the dilemma is when people hear about the concept, of everything that we've talked about, you're like, that's great. Well, good. Now
Yes.
we're going to replace this system you've been using. And somebody's like, wait a second. I've been trained
Mhm.
on that. I'm used to that. Like I find comfort in that. Don't take it away. Like I wasn't thinking about it. I was going to lose anything for a period of time. Is that kind of
Right.
what you're saying, Jeff?
Yeah, exactly. Or I have ownership in that. Like this was, the focus of this system is my contribution to the organization, and so if it goes away, it's like, well, where do I fit, right?
So it's funny you say that. I'll just tell a quick story. I remember a web developer. This is going back. I can't remember what language he programmed in. It wasn't COBOL, but it was Cold Fusion. That's what I think it was. Our website was in Cold Fusion. We wanted to shift away. Like anybody now is probably like, you had a website in Cold Fusion? Like what year was that? Well, it was many years
Right.
ago. So we wanted to switch to, I think it was HTML again. I can't remember what all the details were, but he just wouldn't do it. And then to the point of where I had to say, like, we're going to schedule a time and I'm going to sit next to you and see you do this thing. And so he started and he said, just so you know, the reason I haven't been doing it is because I think I'm going to put myself out of a job. If I don't, you guys have to come through me for every web change. You guys will be able to change this on your own. It was basically like, yeah, but we'll reapply you somewhere else inside the organization, right? But you can't get in the way of progress, right? You just can't get way too comfortable with your systems. But some people do, right? Because we all have our own comfort zones, and then we all have our own panic zone that is beyond that. So we got to work with those things. So, Barry, did you want to share any mistakes that you've seen at all?
I think it's much along the same lines from a strategy perspective, just being very strategic with this, because anytime you're tackling this, thinking ahead and having a plan and following through on it, like I say, the bolt-on approach is a piecemeal thing. You can't do it all at once; it's just too much. So being able to think through where you're going to end up and what your experience for the customer is along that journey, and that's critical. And customer patterns change, so being able to predict that is also challenging, but something that needs to be taken into consideration. I mean, think about us right now. We've gone through a pandemic. We've all been forced to go online for a lot of what we do, whether we had done that previously or not. And more than likely, as the rules are being lifted, there's going to be a shift of people desperate to go back into a store environment and just be there, even if there's nothing really they're after. They just want to be there and have that experience, right? So the patterns change, and the customers are still the customers. You still need to know who they are and what they're after. So being strategic and planning that out is the key. And like Jeff says, it's easy to kind of get distracted and go offline with what that plan might be. And sometimes tech gets in the way of that, right? So
Yep.
so it's always important as technologists for us to look at it from the problem you're trying to solve, and not the technical boundaries that are in the way. There's always another way to get around something. So following that strategy and making sure that the focus is on the right solution is really the key, because as a customer, you don't care what's behind the scenes. You just want to get what you're after.
Right.
Great. Sorry. So we've talked about what Omnichannel 2.0 is, what built in and bolted on is, and then mistakes to be made. So I want both of you to take this very first. What actions should our listeners take, the retail executives who are listening to this? What are the first steps or next steps you recommend to them related to, again, Omnichannel 2.0 with personalization and then also other world-class functionality built in?
I'd always recommend first steps to be evaluate what you have in hand. Look at the systems you have, look at the capabilities, see if there's something you're not leveraging, because sometimes there is, and it's just not, wasn't a focal point when it was first put in. So making sure you understand the entire ecosystem, and like I said, the source of truth is another important one. Obviously, a CRM, anything about customer, you need to know where that lives, what the source of truth is for it, how you're going to tie that in with anything else, and evolve that journey for the customer. And then, do your research. Look at what's out there on the market. Is there something else I can add to the mix to solve a problem? Is it a built-in solution that I could bring in that's going to layer over top of what I have and add value? Or is it something where I need to, take that bolted-on approach because maybe I've got most of what I need, but there's a gap, right? So understanding, take stock of what you have, identify the gaps, and identify the desired flow, the desired outcome, so that you can figure out what that strategy is and how you work towards it.
And can you dig in a little bit on research? Like some people think research are just going to Google the omnichannel solution, right? Like what can you talk about in terms of the best ways to do research really I'm assuming it's going to be partner up with somebody who's been down this road before.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a company like ours where we've done integrations for a living, we have a lot of experiences with how all that stuff gets tied together and how to make the best use of those systems. So partnering up with someone who has some experience is certainly key. At least, bouncing ideas off them, talking to them about what you have and what you're looking for, because sometimes there are opportunities there. And like I say, the partners and even your competitors, looking at all that to understand what it is that they're doing that you're trying to accomplish that maybe you're not doing today, and talking to your vendors and your partners to make sure that you can understand what the best route is to get there.
Great,
Google
Jeff.
works.
That's
Google
right.
works. I'm not gonna
right.
say it's bad, but it's certainly, talking to someone in person is definitely the first way to go.
Yeah, Google will not answer your questions in the context that you want, right? They're not going to ask you back some probing questions. So, Jeff, why don't you wrap us up in terms of what actions do you recommend the retailers listening to us today take?
I thought Barry's content was really good. The thing I would add is there's a big difference with there are people with whom we work that clearly have a clear focus on what the future state should be, and there are others who are much less strong in that area. And so when you're less strong, you're really just looking at what's available now and what this system provides me from a feature function standpoint. And so sometimes you get sort of really weird groups in RFPs, people who are diametrically opposed in terms of their offerings, and it's like, well, if these two are both under consideration, you clearly don't have a good focus for where your system's going. So I'd say take a moment, figure out your job is to explain in 5 minutes what you want your selling model to be. And if you can't do that, maybe spend some time there so that it helps us for sure. I mean, the customers who can clearly describe what they want their future state to be, it's so much easier to work with them than they sort of look at the latest thing that comes in their email and it's like, oh, that seems neat. And it's like, well, can we do this? It's like, yeah, you can do anything, right? Like, so, you're there to make decisions. It's really, you should be driving the show, not just sort of looking at what's coming down the stream and saying, I want some of that, some of that. It might be fine, but, have a direction that you can say, you can test all the possible solutions against.
Great. It reminds me of a business aphorism where conviction comes from clarity. The question is, should we do this? Should we go down this path? And if you're like, I'm not quite sure, it's probably because you're not clear enough in terms of what your customers are doing, the best way to move forward.
Right. Yep. That's good.
Wonderful. Well, that does it for this episode of the RedIron Retail Roundtable. We hope you enjoyed our discussion. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the RedIron YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. Just go to YouTube and search for RedIron Retail to find us. If you're on YouTube, it's like somewhere down here below the three of us. You can go and click and subscribe. Before we go, a big thanks again to Jeff and Barry for sharing their wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RedIron Marketing Director Jeff Williamson for his production work. And last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. For more information and retail technology best practices, visit the RedIron website at redirontech.com. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye, everybody.